I had already read the letter 10 times, maybe more. My eyes kept scanning the same shaky lines, as if by rereading them enough, the words might change. Rachel, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I've fallen in love with someone else. We're leaving today for another city. Please tell the kids I love them. Eric. Just his name at the end, no explanation, no confrontation. Just a cowardly note left on the kitchen counter next to the car keys. My knees gave out. I sank into the chair by the table and held the paper like it might start burning in my hands. My heart pounded against my ribs, the walls of the room closing in. This can't be happening, I whispered to no one. And yet, deep down, I had known. The perfume on his shirts, floral and too sweet, not mine. The late nights, the weekends he claimed were work retreats. The texts at 2 a.m., the hour-long showers. The distance, the coldness, the way even his friends wouldn't look me in the eye when I showed up at gatherings. I had explained it all away. I made excuses for him. I told myself I was just tired, paranoid, hormonal, ungrateful. That he was working hard for us, for the kids. I had trusted him because I had never lied to him. Not once in 15 years. I thought that counted for something. Mom, are we having dinner tonight? I flinched. Noah was standing in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, his voice casual but laced with concern. My first instinct was to hide the letter, but he was too fast. In 2 steps, he was beside me, and before I could react, the paper was in his hands. He read it silently, then sighed, an oddly adult sound coming from a 14-year-old boy. I kind of figured, he said, folding the paper carefully and setting it on the table. You tried calling him? I did, I managed. My voice cracked. He's not picking up. I even called his office. And he quit. A few days ago. No notice. Noah sat down beside me, calm and steady. He looked so much like me. Same hazel eyes, same stubborn mouth. But he had Eric's ability to hide emotion, to mask pain behind composure. You always said he was working late, he said softly. But he wasn't. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe he'd come back to us, that this was just a phase. Noah didn't say anything. He just reached over and placed his hand over mine. You don't have to explain, Mom. But we need to talk about what comes next. Divorce, money, the house. We've still got 5 years on the mortgage, right? I nodded. A dull weight settled in my chest. Yeah, you're right. We should talk. I still can't believe he's gone. We kind of always knew it would happen, didn't we? And somehow that hurt even more. That night, I tried calling Eric again. Straight to voicemail. I texted. No response. I even called his office the next morning, clinging to a thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd show up and explain himself. He doesn't work here anymore, the receptionist said flatly. He resigned last week. He had planned this, walked out on his job, his family, our mortgage, and our children, all in one calculated move. I started calling his friends, the ones who used to come over for game night and backyard BBQs. Most said they hadn't heard from him. Only one, Jeff, hesitated before answering. I thought he was joking, Jeff said finally. He told me he was leaving everything behind. Said he couldn't handle the family life anymore. That he met someone new and wanted a fresh start. You knew? I asked, my voice thin. He was silent for a beat. Yeah, I'm sorry. I hung up. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because there was nothing left to say. When our youngest, Rosie, was born 7 years ago, Eric had insisted I quit my job at the hospital. I was a full-time nurse back then. The work was hard but fulfilling, and I loved it. But Eric told me to let it go. Even if you work double shifts, your salary won't cover daycare for 3 kids, he said. Just stay home. I'll take care of the money. You take care of everything else. I was hesitant, but I agreed. I believed him. I trusted him. I thought we were a team. Now, 7 years later, I had no job, no savings, no backup plan, just 3 kids, a house we didn't fully own, and bills waiting in the mailbox. I sat down at the kitchen table and went through every drawer, every jewelry box, every old envelope. I gathered up what I could. My wedding ring, a pair of pearl earrings Eric gave me our first Christmas together, a silver bracelet my mom left me. I took them all to the pawn shop. They gave me enough to cover groceries and utilities for 2 weeks. Next, I listed the flat screen TV online, sold it to a college student within hours. Then the laptop. Then my new winter boots, never worn, still in the box. I had saved them for a trip we never took. Watching the woman walk off with them, grinning like she'd found treasure, I felt hollow. But I smiled anyway. That money would buy us 2 more weeks. I came home, sat on the edge of the bed, and calculated for weeks. If I cut every unnecessary expense, no dance lessons, no takeout, no birthday presents, I might stretch it to 6. But after that, I didn't know. I didn't even have a resume. I hadn't been in the workforce in nearly a decade. For the first time since reading that letter, I felt something worse than heartbreak. I felt fear. The phone rang just as I was sorting through a drawer full of expired coupons and broken pens, trying to distract myself from the panic creeping into my chest. I didn't recognize the number. Usually, I ignored unknown calls. I didn't have the energy for scam offers or banks reminding me of overdue payments. But something in me whispered, "Answer it." "Hello," I said cautiously. "Hi, is this Rachel Whitaker?" "Yes, my name is Claire Henley. I received your information through the employment center. You listed previous experience as a nurse, correct?" I straightened up. Yes, I did. I worked as a registered nurse for almost 10 years, with some experience in critical care and post-operative recovery. "Wonderful," Claire said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Are you currently seeking employment?" "I am. I might have something for you. It's a private caregiver position. Live-in, high compensation, long-term. You'd be caring for a senior client who requires medical oversight but is still mentally sharp. It's not hospital work, but your background makes you an ideal fit. Live-in." I repeated, unsure I'd heard her correctly. "Yes, and the client has agreed to accommodate caregivers with families. If you have children, they can reside on the property with you. There's a fully renovated guest house next to the main residence." I blinked. Was this real? I do have children. 3 of them. "That's absolutely fine. If you're available, I'd love for you to come in tomorrow morning for an interview. We're located in Rhinebeck." Rhinebeck, less than an hour away. "Sure," I said before I could overthink. "What time?" 10 a.m. "I'll text you the address. Just bring your ID and any documentation of your previous experience." "Okay. Thank you, Ms. Henley. Call me Claire. I'll see you tomorrow." When I hung up, I just sat there for a long moment, staring at the chipped edge of the table. A job, a place to live, for me and my kids. It sounded too good to be true. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school, slipped on my one good blouse, and drove to the address Claire had texted. I expected a modest office in a business park somewhere on the edge of town. What I found instead was a towering glass building in the heart of Rhinebeck's business district. Polished steel, marble floors, and a doorman who greeted me like I didn't belong. I almost turned around, but then I remembered Rosie's face when she asked if we could keep the lights on through the winter. So I walked in. Claire Henley was waiting in a quiet corner office on the 12th floor. She looked exactly how she sounded on the phone. Crisp, professional, but kind in a way that felt real. Her suit was immaculate, her dark hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, but her eyes weren't cold. She smiled when I walked in. "Rachel Whitaker," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Thanks for coming in." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. We sat. She tapped a few times on her tablet, then looked up. "Your resume was sparse, but I can see from your credentials that you were a nurse for almost a decade. It says here you've worked with elderly patients and those requiring post-operative care. Yes, I said. That was before I left the workforce to raise my children full-time. Claire nodded. Understood. And you're still open to a live-in caregiver role? As long as I can have my children with me, yes. Her eyes softened. Of course. The estate has a guest house, renovated, spacious, fully independent. You and your kids would live there. She paused, then added carefully, I should mention the man you'll be caring for, Mr. Franklin Montgomery, is a retired businessman. He's paralyzed from the waist down and suffers from several chronic conditions. Heart, respiratory, digestive. But physically, the work is manageable. The home is fully equipped. What makes this job challenging is Mr. Montgomery himself. I raised an eyebrow. His personality. Claire gave a small, diplomatic smile. Let's just say he doesn't make it easy for most caregivers. He's had a lot of them. None stayed long. He prefers someone with medical experience, and above all, someone who won't take things personally. So he's difficult. Yes, but you'll be compensated accordingly. She turned the tablet toward me. The weekly salary made my breath hitch. That was more than I'd made in a month at the hospital. It includes housing, all utilities, food, and even transportation if needed, she said. You'd start once your children are on break. Does that work for you? I stared at the number again. Then I looked up. Yes, it does. We signed the paperwork, and as I stepped into the elevator afterward, the city stretching out through the glass around me, I felt something strange settle over me. Not peace, not joy, but certainty. I was going to do this, no matter what. We arrived on a bright afternoon, the sky wide and endless above the rolling hills of Hudson Valley. The estate sat tucked behind a wrought iron gate, so tall and ornate it looked like it belonged in a storybook. As our driver, sent by the estate, pressed a button, the gate slowly opened, revealing a winding road lined with manicured trees and blooming wildflowers. Noah leaned forward in his seat. This place is huge. Benji whistled. If this guy's crazy, at least he's crazy rich. Rosie's face was pressed to the window. Is this really where we're going to live, Mommy? I smiled, though my stomach fluttered. Looks like it. We passed a grand, modern mansion of glass and stone, but the car didn't stop there. Instead, we turned onto a smaller path and came to a gentle stop in front of a charming guest house made of restored wood and brick. Ivy climbed the sides. Flower beds lined the path. It looked like something out of a novel. The driver, a friendly young man named Chris, helped us unload our bags and walked us through the cottage. It was bigger than our old apartment. For bedrooms, a sunny kitchen, a cozy fireplace. I felt like an intruder. There's lunch in the main house, Chris said, smiling. Someone will come get you in an hour. True to his word, a tall man in a white button-down appeared right on time. His hair was neatly combed, his eyes warm behind square glasses. Lucas Bennett, he said, shaking my hand, estate manager and unofficial peacekeeper. He led us to the main house through a quiet garden path. Inside, a plump woman in her 50s greeted us with a wide smile. Mrs. Helen Brooks, she said. I run the kitchen here, so if any of you have allergies, speak now or starve later. The kids laughed. I liked her immediately. We were fed a beautiful meal, surrounded by kind faces. But I couldn't relax, because after lunch, Lucas turned to me and said gently, Mr. Montgomery would like to meet you now. I followed him through a hallway so pristine it echoed. Then, Lucas paused in front of a heavy oak door. Don't take anything he says personally, he murmured. He's complicated. Then he knocked. The voice from inside was sharp and impatient. Took you long enough. I thought I'd die waiting. Lucas pushed open the door. Mr. Montgomery, this is Rachel Whitaker, your new caregiver. I stepped in. He was older than I expected. White hair, sharp features, eyes like steel traps. He sat in a motorized wheelchair, one hand resting on a tablet, the other gripping the armrest with unnecessary force. "That's her," he said, not looking at me. "You people keep getting worse." I took a breath. "I can shave you now if you'd like. You're starting to look more homeless than millionaire." The room went still. Then, to my shock, he barked a laugh. "Well," he said, "at least you've got guts. Let's see how long that lasts." The first week was relentless. Every morning began with a sarcastic comment. Every evening ended with a thinly veiled insult. Nothing I did pleased him. If I brushed his hair, I tugged too hard. If I prepared his meds, I moved too slow. If I answered a question, I was being a know-it-all. If I stayed quiet, I was useless. "Do you even own a mirror?" he muttered one day as I walked in. Hair tied back, eyes puffy from a night of worry. "You look like a worn-out dish rag." I ignored him. "You move like a nurse who failed her licensing exam." Still ignored him. One afternoon, as I helped him shift positions in the chair, he sniffed and said, "So, 3 kids and no husband. Let me guess, different fathers." I froze. My jaw tightened. "Same father," I said through my teeth. He smirked. Poor guy. No wonder he ran. I wanted to scream, to cry, to quit, but I didn't, because every time I opened the door to the guest house, I saw my children's shoes by the mat, their drawings taped to the fridge, Rosie humming in the bath, Benji curled up with a book, Noah trying his best to be the man of the house at 14. So I kept going, until one night, close to midnight, my phone rang. It was Lucas. "Come quick. He's having trouble breathing." I didn't even change out of my pajamas, just threw on a hoodie and ran. By the time I got to his room, he was pale, gasping, clutching at his chest. The nurses were trained for emergencies, but I was the only one with a full medical background. "Mr. Montgomery," I said sharply, already pulling out the emergency kit. "You're going to be fine, but you need to let me work." He didn't argue. I slipped the oxygen mask over his face, found the correct ampoule, drew the medication into a syringe. My hands moved on muscle memory, calm, precise, despite the rush of adrenaline. Within minutes, his pulse began to stabilize. His color returned. He slumped back in the chair, eyes fluttering shut. Then, without even opening them, he said, "Took you long enough. Next time, maybe don't stop for coffee on the way." My fingers went still. Any flicker of pity I had vanished. "I'll check your vitals again in 30 minutes, I said flatly and walked out of the room. He almost died. I saved him. And still, somehow, I wasn't enough. The call came right after breakfast. Lucas tapped gently on the cottage door, a cup of coffee in one hand, his usual calm in the other. "You've got the day off." I blinked at him. "I do." He nodded. "Mr. Montgomery's sister and her grandchildren are visiting. Apparently, their presence is enough to keep him civilized for a few hours. Consider it a miracle. A free day. A whole day with no grumbling, no insults, no veiled jabs at my motherhood. Hay plans." Lucas asked, "Maybe clean. Maybe sit very still in complete silence." He laughed. "How about this instead? You let me drive you into town. I've got errands to run, and there's this place with the best khachapuri in the valley." The best what? Trust me. The kids were already running wild around the garden with Chris and Mrs. Brooks, keeping an eye on them. They didn't even notice me slip out. Lucas took us through winding roads and tall trees, the Hudson glittering in the distance. We talked about small things at first, the estate, the weather, his endless to-do list. But once we were seated in the sunny corner of a Georgian restaurant with warm bread and chilled white wine in front of us, something shifted. "Thanks for this," I said, sipping slowly. I didn't realize how much I needed to breathe. Lucas leaned back in his seat. "You've had a rough few weeks." I hesitated. Then the words came, like a faucet finally turned on. "My husband left me," I said quietly. Just left. A note on the table. No warning. Took off with someone else. Lucas's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. I tried to keep things together for the kids. Sold everything we could. I thought maybe he'd come back. But he didn't. Lucas nodded slowly. You deserve better than that. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. He didn't even say goodbye to the children. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, I was engaged once. Thought she was the one. Turned out she wasn't in love with me. Just the idea of who I could become. I'm sorry. He shrugged. We all get broken a little. I just got lucky. My heartbreak came early enough to turn into fuel. That made me smile, genuinely this time. You're one of the good ones, Lucas. He raised his glass. And so are you, Rachel. The wine was warm in my veins. The food was rich and comforting. And for the first time since my world fell apart, I felt like myself again. Not a caregiver, not a single mom, not a liability. Just a woman, sitting across from someone kind. And somehow that was enough. I sat at the table by the window, my fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of water that had already gone warm. The restaurant was quiet for a Saturday afternoon. Muted jazz, clinking cutlery, the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen. I'd chosen this place on purpose. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. Eric was late. Of course he was. When he finally walked in, tan and smiling like he didn't have a care in the world, I had to clench my jaw to keep from showing anything. He slid into the seat across from me, as if we were old friends catching up. Ratch, he said smoothly, you look good. I didn't reply. He sighed, leaning back. Look, I know things got messy, but I've had time to think, and maybe we rushed into this separation thing too fast. I blinked. You left me, Eric. In a note. He waved a hand like that was a minor detail. I panicked. I thought I needed something different, but it turns out the grass isn't always greener. I stared at him. You're the mother of my kids. We have history. We could start over. Clean slate. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. I'm not interested, I said calmly. We're here to finalize the divorce, not rehash your regrets. His face hardened instantly. So that's it? You're really going to throw everything away? You already did. His voice dropped, low and venomous. You think some charity job wiping old man spit makes you too good for me now. I flinched. What? You think raising those kids on your own makes you a saint? You couldn't even keep me. How are you going to hold a family together? A chair scraped behind me. I suggest you lower your voice. A familiar baritone cut in. I turned. Lucas was standing there, arms crossed, expression thunderous. Behind him, leaning casually on his cane, was Mr. Montgomery himself, his brow arched in sardonic amusement. Eric looked between them, confused. Who the hell are you? Her employer, Mr. Montgomery said coolly. And I must say your performance is both pathetic and pitifully predictable. Eric opened his mouth. But before he could get a word out, Lucas stepped forward and, without warning, punched him square in the jaw. The sound echoed. Eric stumbled back into his chair, hand to his face, eyes wide. Silence fell across the room. Mr. Montgomery clapped once, slowly. Marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. I've always found a well-delivered punch far more effective than therapy. I just stared, stunned. Lucas turned to me, chest heaving. You okay? I nodded slowly, still trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Montgomery grinned. Well then, shall we have dessert? I should have felt embarrassed, exposed, but all I felt was protected, and maybe, just maybe, powerful. The ride back to the estate felt longer than usual, even though we hardly said a word. I sat beside Lucas in the back seat, hands clasped tightly in my lap. My heart hadn't quite slowed down. The scene at the restaurant kept replaying in my head. Eric's face when the punch landed, the amused gleam in Mr. Montgomery's eyes. What had I done? When we pulled up to the gates, I braced myself. I expected consequences. Maybe I'd crossed a line. Maybe this strange, promising job, this fragile, precarious second chance, was over. Lucas walked me to the door, but before I stepped inside, he turned to me. "Don't let that man crawl back into your head," he said. "You did nothing wrong." I nodded, though I wasn't so sure. Later that evening, I was summoned to the study. Mr. Montgomery's favorite room. Dark wood paneling, heavy drapes, a wall of leather-bound books he hadn't touched in years. He was sitting by the window, a blanket across his legs, a glass of brandy in hand. I stood silently at the threshold, waiting. "Well," he said without turning around, "that was certainly entertaining." I held my breath. He finally looked at me, his gaze sharp but unreadable. "Don't worry. I won't be firing you. That fool needed to be punched. And frankly, watching someone defend you was surprisingly satisfying." I blinked. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." I did. He swirled the brandy slowly. "You know, I've been married 4 times." I said nothing. He smiled without warmth. Each time, I thought I'd finally gotten it right. Each time I was proven wrong. Turns out, money only attracts one kind of love, the temporary kind. I didn't interrupt. "No children," he added. "Not that I didn't want any. It just never worked out." There was something raw in his voice, something he hadn't shown before. I studied his face, not the gruff lines or the scowl he wore like armor, but the flicker of tiredness beneath, a different kind of tired. Loneliness. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He scoffed, but it wasn't cruel. "Don't be. I'm the one who drove them all away. I'm not easy to love, Miss Whittaker." "Most people aren't," I replied. That made him pause. He looked at me, really looked at me this time. Then he nodded just once. We didn't speak much more after that. But something shifted between us, not quite warmth, but no longer disdain. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. By mid-September, the estate no longer felt like someone else's world. The halls didn't echo so loudly anymore. The silence had softened, not empty, just calm. The children had settled in with remarkable ease. Noah especially. He took to the staff like old friends, helping Helen in the kitchen, occasionally fixing little things with Lucas, who treated him like a young apprentice. They laughed more. Even Eli, my quiet middle child, had begun to open up, climbing trees along the orchard's edge, sketching animals he spotted from his bedroom window. And little Ava, she danced in the hallway like it was her personal stage. The sound of her feet against the marble no longer felt out of place. School would start soon, and the estate was far from their old district. But I wasn't worried. We'd figure it out. Maybe homeschooling, maybe private tutors, maybe something entirely different. But what I knew, deep in my bones, was that we weren't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One golden afternoon, just before the first leaves began to fall, I found Mr. Montgomery in the garden. He was parked beneath the pergola, his lap covered with a knitted blanket Helen had made. The ivy was curling up the wooden beams above him, casting dancing shadows across his face. I brought him a cup of tea. "Thank you," he said without looking at me. We sat for a while, saying nothing. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere, a bird called out, and Ava's laughter rang faintly from the distance. He finally broke the silence. "Your children have good hearts. They're not afraid to live fully even here." I nodded, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. He turned to face me. "That's not by accident, you know. Children reflect what they're given." I swallowed hard, emotion rising like a tide I hadn't expected. "You could have fallen apart," he continued, his voice lower now. "Plenty of people would have. But you didn't." "I did," I admitted. "Just not forever." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's the difference." For a long moment, we just sat there, breathing the same late summer air. I looked at him, This difficult, guarded man who once insulted me for breathing too loudly, and I felt something close to gratitude. Not for the pain, not for the betrayal that brought me here, but for what came after. I wasn't the woman who stood crying in her kitchen anymore, clutching a letter that tore her life in half. I was still healing, still figuring things out, but I was no longer lost. I was building something new, beneath an unfamiliar sky, in a place I never meant to call home. And somehow, that made all the difference. It started with a lie, a small one. "It's just a weekend at the lake with family," Richard said, eyes barely flicking up from the TV screen as he tossed the comment into the air like it was nothing. And I, Helen Parker, 50 years old and too tired to argue, nodded like always. I went to the kitchen, made his dinner, and told myself it didn't matter. I had work, the house to keep clean, Ethan's laundry to finish. There was never time for me anyway, not for decades. But the lie wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how normal it all felt. Like being ignored, dismissed, unseen, was just part of the routine. And maybe it was. It was a Friday afternoon when I met Carol at the little diner off Route 23. The same one we've been going to since our kids were in diapers. Carol ordered sweet tea and leaned across the table with that gleam in her eye. "I saw this promo," she said. "Outer Banks. 7 nights. Oceanfront. Half price for early bookings." I smiled politely like I always did. She kept talking about sunsets, sand between toes, and waking up to the sound of waves. I stirred my coffee. "You remember how we used to dream about seeing the ocean?" she asked. I did. I remembered it painfully well. We were both 7. We'd watched some travel special on her parents' old box TV. Endless blue waves, seagulls, boardwalks. I swore to myself then and there, I'd stand on that shore one day. I'd breathe that salty air and let it change me. But then life happened. I met Richard, got pregnant with Ethan, got promoted at the bank. And somewhere between tax returns and school lunches, that little girl with big dreams vanished. "I'm too old for that now," I said, smiling sadly. "Too many bills. Too many responsibilities." Carol shook her head, pulling out her phone and scrolling through pictures of a charming little inn by the water. "You're not dead, Helen. You're 50. We still have bones in our legs. And there are things you need that Richard is never going to give you. Like silence, sunlight, sanity." I laughed, but it was the kind that hurt a little in the chest. Later that night, I sat in the dark kitchen with a cooling cup of tea. Richard had fallen asleep on the couch again, socks on the coffee table, the remote still in his hand. I watched his chest rise and fall and wondered if he even knew who I was anymore, or if he cared. The next day, Carol texted, "Last day to book. I'm doing it. Come with me. 1 week. You need this." I hovered over the message for what felt like hours. Then Ethan barged in, dropped his gym bag on the floor, and asked if I could spot him a few hundred for rent. Again, "No, hi, Mom." "No, how was your day?" Just hands out, palms up, like I owed him the air he breathed. I didn't answer. Not right away. I went upstairs, opened the closet, pulled out the suitcase I hadn't used since my mother's funeral. It still smelled like mothballs and regret. I stared at it for a long time. That night, I told Richard over dinner. He didn't look up from his plate. "You're going where?" "To the Outer Banks. With Carol. Just a week." He laughed. "You? The beach? At your age?" I said nothing. He kept eating, then added, "You're out of your damn mind if you think I'm staying here and cooking for myself." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Then don't eat." For a moment he froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. He blinked, like I'd just spoken in another language. "You're serious?" "I am." "Jesus, Helen, you're going to run off to the beach like some teenager on spring break." "No," I said calmly, like a woman who hasn't seen the ocean in 50 years. He scoffed. Ethan, sitting beside us, looked up from his phone just long enough to mutter, "Sounds nice, actually." But then he added, "Could you help me out before you go, though? Rent's due Monday." And that was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just invisible, I was useful. A tool, a servant, and even that was taken for granted. So I nodded, packed my things quietly. And when the day came, Carol and I walked onto the platform with our tickets and our old lady beach bags. I thought the hardest part was behind me, but I'd forgotten one thing, my passport. And that mistake changed everything. We were already on the platform when I realized it. My heart stopped. I dug through my tote bag once, twice, then dumped the entire contents onto the bench. Lip balm, tissues, my wallet, my phone. No passport, no ID, nothing that would let me check in at the hotel or board the train. "I left it," I whispered. "At home, in the nightstand drawer." Carol looked at her watch. "You've got maybe 30 minutes. Go, run." I didn't even answer. I just ran. The streets of Columbus blurred as I pushed past people, the morning air slapping against my cheeks. My legs hadn't moved that fast in years, but adrenaline will do strange things to a woman running from her own life. I didn't even notice the pain in my knees or the tightness in my chest. I just kept going. When I reached the house, it was quiet. Richard's truck was gone. I fumbled with the key, flew through the door, sprinted up the stairs. The drawer was half open as if mocking me. My passport sat right there, smug and flat and infuriating. I grabbed it, and then I heard the voice. Not in my head, not a memory. A real, living voice coming from our bedroom. Richard's voice. At first, I thought he'd come back and left the TV on. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Kitten, I'm all yours for the next 2 weeks. My chicken flew the coop, finally." He laughed. That low, cocky laugh he used to have in his 20s. I froze. "She left this morning," he continued, voice thick with smugness. "Dragged her old suitcase behind her like she's going to find herself on a beach somewhere. Makes things easier for us, huh?" Us. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The words, "my chicken," circled in my head like a wasp. That's what he called me. That's what I'd been reduced to. A joke. A dumb bird who didn't know what was happening right under her nose. I heard the woman's voice on the other end of the line. Too muffled to make out the words, but her laugh was clear. Younger, brighter. I imagined her with salon-styled hair and smooth skin, wearing the kind of perfume I stopped affording years ago. "I know, baby," Richard said, still chuckling. She looked so proud of herself this morning, like she's finally doing something brave. Bless her heart. That was enough. I backed out of the room like a thief. I didn't cry. Not then. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely lock the door on my way out. I didn't think. I just walked. By the time I reached the station, my legs were numb and I was soaked in sweat. Carol spotted me from the platform and ran to meet me. "Did you get it?" she asked, clutching my arm. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I got it," I said, holding up the passport. She narrowed her eyes. "You sure that's all you saw?" I nodded, because I couldn't say it out loud. Not yet. Not while it still echoed in my ears. My chicken flew the coop. The train pulled in. We boarded in silence. And as the wheels began to turn and Columbus disappeared behind us, I sat by the window, gripping my passport like a lifeline and stared at the horizon. I wasn't running away. I was waking up. The train ride felt like moving through a different life. As if the further we got from Columbus, the less I belonged to the version of Helen Parker who'd washed Richard's socks for 20 years without a thank you. Carol chatted beside me, flipping through a travel guide and pointing out all the places she wanted to visit. Beaches, seafood joints, nature trails. I nodded along, but my mind was still in that bedroom with that voice on the phone. We arrived in the Outer Banks just before sunset. The ocean was already whispering in the distance, a low rumble like it had been waiting all this time for me to come home. I stepped off the train and froze. The smell hit me first, salty, alive, vast. Then came the breeze, warm, humid, but different from Ohio's heat. This was wild and open and free. Carol looked at me and grinned.